Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another virtual program of Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield Park. My name is Ranger Jake Bowling, and no, I am not standing at Kennesaw Mountain. I'm in Marietta Square with beautiful South Park Street behind me, and on my right and left, almost as if they were put here for this shot, two beautiful crepe myrtle trees. Now you may be asking a very good question. Why is a park ranger of Kennesaw Mountain standing in Marietta Square, some 3-4 miles away from my natural habitat? Well, that goes into our program of today. As you know, this is Women's History Month, and like many of the great posts and videos the Rangers have done so far to tell some of those stories, this program is no different. And we're going to highlight a civilian woman named Monemia Johnson. Now, her story and why I'm standing in the square will become apparent as we go forward. Now, Monemia Johnson was a freed black woman that was born in 1820s. Well, she was not born in Georgia. She would later move here in the 1850s with her husband, James Johnson. Now, together they were fairly atypical of African Americans in the antebellum South in Georgia. Atypical meaning that they were enterprising. They were a freed black couple that lived and worked in the square, had their own business. Monemia would go on from the 1850s and the 1860s, would go on to open up her own general store / restaurant. And James would be employed as a barber. So by the 1860s, the Johnson's family's business is moving pretty well. They have 3 children now. And then 1861 happens. And as I am a park ranger at a Civil War park, you knew the Civil War was going to have something to do with it. So as war begins, life in Marietta gets kind of interesting. Over the next couple of years, James Johnson, as the barber, a lot of his customers would start to filter in, and some of his customers he started noticing were Confederate officers, Confederate generals. And as you do in the barber chair, sitting around with your friends, you talk shop, you talk about what you work. And James Johnson listened. And he listened, and James would actually go and talk shop and talk about what he heard at work with a neighbor of his, a man named Henry Green Cole. Now, Henry Green Cole was a pretty interesting guy, and as I mentioned, he was a neighbor of the Johnsons. Henry Green Cole was a civil engineer, kind of deposited here from New York. And after the Civil War began, as you can imagine, as we mentioned, lines were drawn. Henry Green Cole was an ardent unionist. He was definitely pro-union, and he made no bones about it. And because of his job as a civil engineer and his knowledge of some of the trains and railroads and things like that in the area, many people called him the most dangerous man in Georgia, and eyes were on him. Well, Henry Green Cole, as an ardent unionist, eventually would become a spy. After talking with James Johnson, who lived just down the street, James Johnson and Monemia were themselves very pro-union. And after talking with James and understanding some of James's clientele, Henry Green Cole put an idea into James's head and asked him if he wouldn't mind keeping his ears to the ground, so to speak, and keep feeding him any information so that he could pass it along. Tell what these Confederate generals are talking about. This would pay off in a big way in 1863 at the Battle of Chattanooga. George H. Thomas, who was one of the major generals over the Army of the Cumberland, who would later be at Kennesaw Mountain, they called him the Rock of Chickamauga. He was a very popular, well-known general, would go on to say that the information provided by Henry Green Cole, and James Johnson provided that information to Cole, would be invaluable and save, quote, the Army of the Cumberland from destruction, pure destruction in 1863 at the Battle of Chattanooga. So it's a big deal. Now, this had ramifications. The Confederates got suspicious, and they kind of set Henry Cole up. A couple of months later, into 1864, they posed as Union spies and provided some false information. And when that false information made it back to where they thought it would, they arrested Cole. The Confederate government arrested Cole and threw him in jail. Now, James got scared because, of course, the Confederate government would start to look for who his informant was. So, James Johnson flees and heads up to Tennessee, which is now heavily under Union control. Now, I've just talked about a lot of people that weren't Monemia, and here's where she comes back into the story, and where we start to see what a miraculous and incredible woman she was. So James leaves. She is now a single mother to, right before they left, they had another child, so a single mother to 4 children, running her business by herself. And as hard as that was, things end up getting just a little bit worse for Monemia later on in 1864. So after the battle, Kennesaw Mountain in June, and later the fall of Atlanta in September. Right before Sherman leaves to go and take most of his army to the south to march to the sea, he exits the area and ends up burning Marietta, burning this in this area right where I am. And before he burns the city, his men clean out some of the local businesses and when they're foraging or getting supplies for their long journey. And as you can imagine, a restaurant or general store would be a #1 target. So the men hit Monemia's store. It does get, in addition to all of the supplies they take from it, it does get damaged, and they leave. So now Monemia is a single woman raising 4 children without a business, without a way to make money. So not a lot is known about Monemia's life from 1864 and 5 for the next 5 years, in 1870. But that's where her story gets a little more interesting, and this incredible woman and her story gets better. So after the Civil War, a function of the executive branch was developed called the Southern Claims Commission. And the Southern Claims Commission was designed to address claims by southern states to get damages dealt to them and paid to them by the United States government for damages done during the war. Monemia was able to pull together a lawsuit against the federal government by 1870 and submitted it. She sued the federal government through the Southern Claims Commission for damages done to her store and for the materials that she took. This was incredible. This was very difficult to do for not only a woman, but for an African American woman to be able to pull together these resources, get together the proper paperwork, and have this claim submitted. And surprisingly, the claim was accepted. She successfully sued the federal government. Now, she detailed and itemized things, the things that she mentioned that was missing, that were stolen, were everything from that you would imagine from a general store: foodstuffs, wine, livestock, even beds and bedding. She estimated her damages at somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,000, which was a pretty penny back in the 1870s. She was eventually rewarded, even though her claim was advocated for and that she won. She would only be awarded $248, or in today's money, somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,500. Okay, so it wasn't much, but it was something. And the fact that she was able to carry herself through that process without her husband, which James Johnson, his whereabouts were unknown, and eventually he would die later on, leaving her a widow. So it goes to show you that history isn't just, as I mentioned before, history isn't confined to Kennesaw Mountain. The effects of war are long-reaching, and these stories, these civilian stories, these stories that enter around the Civil War that are fascinating, show the ability of these incredible people like Monemia, okay, these other incredible women that we've done posts about this month. And it shows how interesting some of these stories can be. Now, following up with this post, a lot of the information that we have about Monemia was from census records. I'll be able to provide links to that, as well as pictures of the square today and when it was burned in the 1864. We don't know exactly where Monemia's shop was. My cameraman is going to kind of pan the camera just a little bit. Let's see if we could do it and point this way. We think that her shop was somewhere across the street, okay, to the southeast of Marietta Square, but that is anecdotal evidence, so we're not 100% sure. But do some digging. Go to the Marietta Museum of History, see if you can find some old maps, look on some of these resources that we'll post after this video. So signing off, I want to say thank you again for hanging out with us. Again, my name is Ranger Jake. I hope you enjoyed the program, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Black and white picture showing the destruction of Marietta Square circa 1864 by the Union soldiers. Man in the forefront sits on a pile of bricks. Behind him, to the viewer's back right, are 4 large white columns, which is all that remained of Marietta's courthouse. This is a modern-day picture of the Marietta Square, taken from the southeastern corner. This is the same viewpoint as the previous picture, with the courthouse to the viewer's right. Instead of the large building with the 4 white columns, there is 2 more modern buildings with glass windows. There, of course, is wide streets, bustling with cars. It is a sunny day in the picture.